Hello. This is Coppertop, here reading the intro for Jim. I thought I would give you a little intro. I am sure most of you will turn this video off halfway, because it tends to get repetitive. But I wanted to have a good, authoritative proof of record regarding this topic. This is a video about Blaha and his hypocrisy concerning weight training with a belt. Jason Blaha spent years bad-mouthing other people who trained with a belt. Then, once his body began to break down, his age crept up on him, and he realized that his numbers are nowhere near impressive when in comparison to the rest of the fitness community or powerlifting community. He started training with a belt. I really can't state enough that Jason Blaha is very unimpressive. Any gym in America has multiple people who can outlift him. His body looks terrible. Jason Blaha could not win a Texas high school powerlifting meet. And while that in itself is not a crime, and most of the population is right there with him, others aren't trying to sell you snake oil. Jason spent years bemoaning the training style of others because it allowed him to throw stones while upon his high horse. But Jason lives in a glass house inside of a sweaty, tiny, apartment in a retirement village. And like many other things in his YouTube history, he eventually became the target of his own vitriol. Did Jason Blaha handle this with class? Did he admit that he simply has a bad habit of targeting other behavior because he feels it gives him a moral authority, which he needs in order to feel validated because he has no scientific, achievement, or industry-based authority? No. Jason did not. He gave excuses, tried to outmaneuver his former self with more Google science, and ignored the issue altogether. Did he apologize to those he referenced in his former videos? Those that he mocked and threw under the bus? No. Did he apologize to anyone who took him as an authority, and who may have been following his advice, only to find out later that it was improper advice? No. This is why I make these videos about Jason Blaha. What bothers me is not the obvious mania he has created. Others have covered that very in depth. What bothers me is that he essentially ran his YouTube channel for years with a method of tearing down and mocking any system that was not the one he was doing at the moment. And after painting himself into a corner, he would pivot without ever apologizing or acknowledging that he feels like he needs to tear down others because he knows the emperor wears no clothes, and that he knows he has no authority in which to be giving advice, other than of an average gym bro. Jason could have always done the normal thing that normal people do. He could have said, "Hey, this is how I do it, and my body is really responding to this thing right now. You guys might want to try it. But when it stops working, I'm going to have to pivot and probably try something else, and you guys might have to do that as well." Instead, Blaha goes the route of what I am doing right now is the morally superior stance, and anyone who differs from it is living a lie based upon junk science and false hopes. He can't tell you that he likes red today, but may want blue tomorrow. He will tell you that he uses red because science says red is better, and that anyone who uses blue is a failure and an idiot and is vain. And when he switches to blue, it's because of newer studies. Until he acknowledges that his channel is based upon this, and also apologizes for it, I don't think I'll ever stop making videos. And Blaha has a very large back catalog of hypocrisy that many haven't even addressed. So please pay attention to this video, and try to make a good argument on why anyone should ever listen to him as an authority figure when it comes to fitness. My videos are free to all to manipulate, copy, and reuse. I will do my best to get them up on that other streaming website that isn't run by the PC police. If the videos I reference here happen to magically disappear from Blaha's catalog, I will upload them to that other site as well.
Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about weightlifting belts, why you use them, what the purpose is. And I had mentioned in a video in the Monday Q&As that you don't wear weightlifting belts for safety at all. That they won't protect your lower back if your technique is bad. You're still going to snap your shit up. So the question becomes, why do you wear a weightlifting belt? The short answer, to lift more weight. And I really mean that. A weightlifting belt should add 40 to 50 pounds or at least 20 kilos to your squat, minimum. And in fact, what you're going to find is that guys who train exclusively with a belt and knee wraps, for example, when they get to that 500-pound squat and they go to do it raw, they pull the belt and the knee wraps off, they might get buried under 405 for their first rep. Now, the downside of the belt is that it doesn't allow your core to get as strong. And what you're going to find, again, like I said before, you can build up your strength to a really high level while using the belt, and you pull the belt off, and you find out you don't have a strong enough core to actually lift the weight that you were lifting with the belt anymore. So for people who really want true athletic performance and athletic strength, you're going to need to spend a lot of time training without the belt. Now, which people would want to use a belt all the time? very serious competitive bodybuilders, fitness models, people who are obsessed with aesthetics. And the reason is that if you wear a belt for all your heavy squats and deadlifts, your core isn't going to get as thick. It might help you keep half an inch or an inch of extra muscle from developing on your core when you get really, really strong. Because let's be honest, if you start doing 500-pound squats, 600-pound deadlifts without a belt, your core will thicken up a little bit. I mean, you're not going to add 4 inches of muscle here, but you're probably going to add up to an extra inch of muscle by doing that around your waistline. And if your goal is to have a 29 or 30-inch waist when you're doing photos or you're on bodybuilding stage, this could create a problem for you. So those are the people who are going to want to wear a belt the vast majority of the time, or people who are looking for those classic lines and that Apollyon type physique with a very dramatic V-taper and that little small waist. But if you're going to be a true strength athlete or an athlete who needs strength in their sport and core strength and stability, you're going to want to spend most of your time training without a belt. Because remember, it's there to give you artificial stability. When is it appropriate to train deadlifts without a belt? When you are not about to compete with a belt in a meet. If you're not within, say, 6 to 8 weeks of doing a competition where you're going to wear a belt on the deadlift, it's appropriate to train the deadlift without a belt at any point outside of that. Every time you train if you want, no problem. You can go up to 5 reps, you can go up to 8 reps as long as your technique is good, just fine. In fact, you can do high reps with them as long as you can maintain proper technique. I'm not really a big fan of using the belt on the deadlift anyway, so it's kind of a funny question for you to ask. It's appropriate most of the time if that's what you choose to do. You'll see tons of guys, for example, who might be similar size. You have one guy who squats completely beltless for a couple of years who gets up to, say, a 450 squat without a belt. And in the same training phase, his friend might get up to a 500 squat with a belt, maybe a 520. And they're the same size, and then you put them side by side and put the belt off, and the one who hasn't trained without a belt can't squat 450. He can't even usually squat 400. The guy who got to a 500 squat training exclusively with a belt every time he got to 315 or higher, sometimes his squat drops to under 400 pounds. When he doesn't have the belt on, he doesn't know how to use his core without a belt. His core becomes suddenly worthless. He can't stay upright. He can't do anything without the belt. He's back to where a lot of people get after 1 year of training, even though he's a 500-pound raw squatter with the belt. Which one really has the stronger core? The one who trained without the belt. If you train exclusively with a belt, you're not going to have a belt on when you need them for some reason in the real world. You have to pick up something heavy. You have to move something. You have to take an impact or a hit. Your core is not going to respond the same as it does when you wear a belt. And so it comes down to specificity of training. If you've done nothing but belted squats as your primary form of training and you pull the belt off, a lot of guys lose 100 or more pounds off of their squat. They feel floppy, they feel wobbly, they're not stable because they've only trained their core to brace itself when it has something to physically press against. And once that's gone, they almost fold over like a big floppy noodle as soon as a heavy weight gets on their back. Guys who can squat 450 pounds sometimes struggle with 350 or 375 to even stay upright, because they've used a belt all this time to train them to keep their core and their torso upright using that extra intra-abdominal pressure. And when it's not there, they just struggle to work with the same weights. They can't even hold the same weight upright on their shoulders oftentimes. And the thing to remember with all of this is that at the end of the day, the belt is just a tool in your toolbox, like a tool in your toolbox like anything else. It has its uses, it has its pros, it has its cons, it has its application. And don't be like a lot of these guys you see at the gym who wear a belt for everything. You go over to some gyms and you guys see guys cinching up a belt to do side laterals, to do curls, to do tricep push downs, everything. And it's really hilarious when you think about the purpose of a belt. These are people who are wearing it as a fashion accessory to look hardcore. They don't understand the use of the belt, because there are legitimate athletes out there who do benefit from using a belt. And that would be specifically power lifters when they're peaking for a competition where they're wearing a belt, strongmen who wear belts in a lot of their competitions, and even some bodybuilders who are trying to get maximum leg development off of various squats and things. Those people are probably actually going to benefit from a belt. And I will say though, those of you who've been training only with a belt, if you take your belt off and you go back and try to do some of your heavy full body lifts that you've been using only with a belt, it's going to be a humbling experience for you to go back and have to realize how much less weight you could actually lift without one. You'll be surprised. Some of you guys should try it. just so that you can see the difference. And it might be a very humbling experience for you. It might be a very amusing experience for you. And at the very least, it might show you that you personally should probably be working on your core a little more. If you have a tremendous difference between the two, your core might actually be your weak link, and it's something that you might want to actually consider working on a lot more if that turns out to be the case. If you lose 100 pounds off your squat or 50 pounds off your deadlift and you pull that belt off. So just give it a try. I believe that yes, you get better overall core strength and core development without a belt. All right, you take two guys who have a 500-pound squat with a belt on. That's what they hit in competition. One of them spends most of his year training without a belt. The other one trains exclusively with a belt. Anything over about 300 pounds he throws a belt on. Who's stronger when you take the belt off? Because, according to what these people are saying, who say it gives you more core engagement, more core development, if they're right, when you take the belt off, the guy should have just as strong, if not a stronger core than the guy who trains without a belt. In fact, in theory, his core should be stronger. But it's not the case. The guy who trains year-round without a belt and only puts it on a peak for a powerlifting meet can usually still squat 450 without the belt. The guy who never squats over 300 beltless, when you take the belt off, his 500-pound belted squat, he's lucky to get 350 or 365. Furthermore, all your Olympic lifters, they train without a belt year-round. If it made their core stronger to do, say, their squatting with a belt, don't you think they would all be squatting with belts? Guys who are winning the gold medals, they would be squatting with belts because it would make their core stronger and it would carry over to their other lifts, and they might be able to, clean and jerk 2 more kilos as a result of it. But they don't do it that way because it doesn't seem to. They don't need it, and therefore there's no point in it. All right, fine, if you compete with a belt in some sport, that's fine, but what about all these people who just want to be strong and fit? What role does a belt have for them? It doesn't. I think it gives you a weaker core when you don't have the belt on. When you get in any sort of other lift that you need to do, that you can't wear a belt, you're not going to get the same carryover as if you train without a belt all the time. What happens when you need to do something in an emergency? You need to pull something heavy off of someone, and you don't have as strong of a core as if you had trained without a belt. It's going to be harder for you to do. So anyone who's not a competitive power lifter or a competitive strongman who trains with a belt, I think it's pointless. I don't think there's any benefit to it. I think you're wasting your time. And you could have a stronger overall core if you just skip the belt. I mean, if you want to spend $100 on a nice belt and have a fashion accessory at the gym, if that makes you happy, then by all means continue to do it. But what I'm advocating is that for the same amount of work and for $100 less, you could have a stronger core if you just skipped using the belt. I know people know I own a 10 millimeter and a 13 millimeter lever belt. The people who train without the belt end up with stronger cores in the long term. And again, every single champion I can think of at the world level, just about, the majority of them train without a belt during much of their off season, no matter what. And then they put the belt on as they start peaking for meets. So that's a really common theme. There are exceptions, but there are sure a lot who do that. And ultimately, what it comes down to, as I've said before, you're going to be stronger and have a stronger core without the belt when you're in any situation where you don't have a belt if you haven't been training with one. Who is going to have the stronger core to take a hit in the guts? The guy who's been deadlifting 500 pounds with a belt, or the guy who's been deadlifting 500 pounds without a belt? The guy who's been doing all this without a belt is used to training under load and contracting his abs and stabilizing his core without a belt on. He doesn't have a belt to push against. The advantage of wearing a belt is that if you train in a competition that lets you wear a belt, some guys get 20, 30, in some cases, and I know people are going to argue, there might be some people who get 50 pounds out of their belt on something like a squat. Again, that's pretty extreme, but there might be guys who are getting that much out of it. But it lets you lift more in competition, but it's a minimum of 20 pounds on the squat. A weightlifting belt should add 40 to 50 pounds or at least 20 kilos to your squat, minimum. For me, it's 20 pounds historically. About 10 kilos when I was over in the UK when I would compare them. So that's about 22 pounds. That's what I get out of a belt on the squat. And because I'm allowed to wear the belt in competition, of course I'm going to use it. It gives me an advantage. It gives me an advantage in competition, although I would pull without a belt because I didn't like it on the deadlift. I felt it impeded my strength on the deadlift in some ways because it made it more difficult for me to breathe. So I don't even like the belt on the deadlift. The squat, yeah, good for at least 20, 25 pounds. So you get an advantage out of it. So if you do some training with the belt and then you wear the belt in competition, you're getting a competitive edge. How about if you get hit with something in the real world? What if you have someone come and beat you or hit you with a bat or a crowbar, or you get hit by a car? You get hit by a car. What are the chances you're going to get organ damage? What are the chances you could crack a vertebrae in your spine? Rupture a disc from a car impact? Pretty high. If you can have your core as strong as possible, you're less likely to have that happen. It's going to give you a degree of protection. It's not going to ensure it by any means, but every little bit helps in those situations. And you know what? People will say things like, well, you can't spend your life worried about that. Yeah, but you're people who are in shape, who work out. You train already. These things do happen. They happen every day. People get concussions from assaults and blunt objects every day. People get hit by cars every single day. People fall down stairs every single day. Think about it. It doesn't really take much out of your training to just not wear a belt. If people train the way that I advocate in general, it is impossible for you to not have a strong core. You are probably going to have a much stronger core than most of the gym bros who do tons of core work. You're probably going to have a stronger, thicker, more developed core than they are. And it has to do with the way that I recommend that people train. And a lot of it has to do with exercise selection, everything else. But really high on that list is going to be the beltless training. Now, I see people argue back and forth on this, and it's interesting. The only people who ever advocate for this, and I think it's their personal bias, I do see a couple of people out there who have science backgrounds who do say, hey, no, use a belt for core training. Interestingly enough, they're all very serious competitive powerlifters who compete wearing a belt. All right? Yet, interestingly enough, there are also guys who lift more than them who are elite Olympic athletes who completely disregard the belt. They don't use belts at all. You need to think about that. There are people who squat over 600 pounds beltless multiple times a week who don't wear a belt ever for any reason. All these guys generally agree that their core development and stability is stronger if they train without a belt. Most, again, your Olympic lifters out there, because they have to compete without a belt, they train everything without a belt. And it's interesting, you see a lot of guys who maybe have weaker core. You see guys in gyms wearing belts for curls, guys wearing belts for side laterals. All right, these are guys who are in here just fucking around in the gym, and they wear a belt for everything. His core is ridiculous. Beltless training is a big part of it. You want a stronger core, ditch the fucking belt. Quit using a crutch. How in the hell are you not going to have a strong core? Standing work, doing tons of barbell work that you do standing will build your core. Same thing with a lot of your other training. All this standing work gives you free core work. I do all of my training standing. The only exercise I personally don't do these days standing on my feet with a barbell is chin-ups. But I do find it ironic when you have guys who are scared to do all this heavy standing work without a belt because they're scared their core is going to hypertrophy and get bigger and they won't have the little dainty feminine wasp waist that the gay dudes really, really like. Do your core work standing. Standing crunches with bands, standing crunches with cables. If you're going to do extra core work, you're going to get the most bang for your buck and the most carryover doing standing core work, because that's how you play on a playing field, that's how you play in a boxing match, that's how you play in a street fight, that's how you train with your barbell movements. The movements that need the most core are the ones that involve standing. Specificity of training, specific adaptation to imposed demands. You want a stronger core when you're standing, you probably need to train your core when you're standing. Belts have their place for competition. But as far as the average lifter who just wants to get into really good shape needing either one, not really. I don't think they're even useful. But you see people who have to have them. So that's the reason belts are useful on the squat, for example. That's why a lot of people can squat 20, 30 more pounds with a belt on than without it. It's because it gives you something to engage your core against, to press against, to create more intra-abdominal pressure. That intra-abdominal pressure keeps you upright more, because your lower back doesn't have to work as hard to keep you upright because of the intra-abdominal pressure. That's what belts do. That's what they do. They help keep you in an upright position when you do squats and things like that. That's the purpose of a belt. And you know what? If a person's goal was to purely power lift, and they did not care at all, zero zip zilch about any other performance element, like they didn't care at all about their performance, their appearance, nothing but how they do in a powerlifting meet, is that was their only reason for training, with no concern for any other fringe benefits like athleticism, being able to take a hit in the guts, anything else, that would be a logical argument. The problem is that for me personally, I want to be better than just a competition squat, bench, and deadlift. I have other exercises I want to be better at. I want to be overall more athletic and have an overall strength base. Well, having an overall strength base requires me to be strong without a belt also. So this idea that you have to wear a belt to be the best obviously isn't true, and a lot of these guys seem to benefit. People honestly saying, well, they would be even better if they trained with the belt year round. Are you sure of that? I'm not sure of that. Because in my experience, it affects your training in a different way. And something I have observed multiple times in my life watching lifters, and a lot of coaches have noted this over the years, guys who train with belts to build their strength up oftentimes are not as strong as you would expect when they take the belt off. In other words, they're kind of one-trick ponies. They can lift with a belt. They can't lift without the belt. Some people say, what do you mean it can't be that bad? I've seen it firsthand. I have watched guys build up to a 450 plus squat without a belt. What happens when they throw a belt on? They hit 480, 490, 500. I've also seen guys who squat over 450 with a belt. Guys who are squatting 460, 470, 480 with that belt on. They take the belt off and they're always like, well, I use the belt after I get through my warm-ups, after I go over, I'll go up to 315 without a belt, and then I put a belt on for anything over that. Well, it turns out that 315 is about all they can handle without a belt once they do that. And I've seen it, watched it, and it's almost comical to watch. I've seen guys and other coaches have written about this, that same guy, when he takes his belt off, you put 365 on the bar, and he struggles with it. He has a good morning it up. You try to put 400 on there, and he can't lift it. It's an expensive piece of equipment that you have to maintain, that you have to pack around to the gym, that you have to take extra time putting on when it is of questionable benefit. It's of questionable benefit. I've simply never observed athletes who train with a belt year round end up being stronger or better than the guys who train without the belt. Once the guys who train without the belt throw the belt on, they're just as strong when it comes time to show off in competition.